thank you so much to the in-house recruitment team for giving me the opportunity to actually speak here today. You guys do amazing, incredible work uniting the community and giving thought leaders the opportunity to speak. So if we could just give a round of applause actually to the in-house recruitment team for, for all the great work that they've been doing. Now my presentation today is going to be centered around how we win the hearts of Generation Z. How essentially do you attract and engage Generation Z on social media? So fundamentally, what I believe is that as recruiters, especially recruiters who are really engaged with attracting and engaging Generation Z on social, one of the most important things for us to do before we get into anything is to understand the mindset of Generation Z. Now, my presentation is going to run through tips and tricks and all that jazzy stuff, but I think as a core fundamental, we have to get into the minds of Generation Z. So that's what I'm going to be running through over the next 10, 15 minutes. And before I do, by means of introduction, my name is Mills. I'm 23 years old, and I am the founder. I'm an ex-aerospace engineering student at the University of Manchester. Anyone from the University of Manchester? Hey, at the back. And I'm the founder of a media company called TapIn. Essentially, we're a media company that's on a mission to prepare 100 million young people for the world of work. And what we've done over the last year is that we've built social communities across social media, and we look after one of the UK's largest networks of micro and nano influencers. We also have the pleasure, and I've had the pleasure in the last year and a half or so, with working with some of the largest organizations in the country, supporting them with attraction and engagement strategies and campaigns, all centered around attracting Gen Z to their organizations. So before we start, I thought, we've had our tea, everyone's comfortable. I thought we could play a little game. So if everybody would love to stand up. So the game is called How Well Do You Know Gen Z? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a series of memes. Anybody know what memes are? I'm going to share a series of memes on the screen and Gen Z cultural references. And what I'd like you to do is to stay standing if you know what the meme or Gen Z cultural reference is, or sit down if you don't know what this Gen Z or cultural reference actually is. So everyone ready? Perfect, here goes. Anyone know what this is? If you know what it is, stay standing. Amazing, incredible. Anyone at the back? Amazing. Ice bucket challenge. The next one. Yeah, everyone's still standing. That's the Dolly Parton challenge. Next one. Yeah, everyone's still standing. That means we know what this is. So that's the bottle top challenge. And the next one.
This is saying we've got kids.
Okay, flossing. This one. If you've seen this or know what it is, stay standing. Okay, we still have a couple of people standing, which is good, which is absolutely amazing. This is good. So this is a jaywalk. This is a jaywalk challenge. What about this one? And I will ask people. Anyone know what it is? Yes, a move like a snake. Okay, next one. This one's a new one. Oh, giving it away. I'll play it. Just, let's see if this works. Okay. Okay, that's fine. I think I've given it away anyway. That one was a stair shuffle challenge. This only came out a week ago. So for those of you that are standing, a round of applause. Honestly, a round of applause. This only came out a week ago. And the reason I had us play this game was to push this message, which is memes are essentially the message. That's how we communicate. And I say we because I'm Gen Z and I consider ourselves to be in that demographic. They're the means of communication, right? We share messaging through memes. and they're the key form of information. So, what I did in preparation for this was actually I just walked around the office and I said, guys, do you guys actually, do this? Do you guys actually speak in memes? And Elijah, our head of creative, was like, yeah, I do speak in memes. And this is a whole GIF conversation from Elijah speaking to his friends in memes. So for those of you that don't believe it, here's proof and evidence for that particular thing. Now, there are three fundamentals that we have to understand when it comes to Generation Z. The first one is, when you're producing content or you're producing any piece of material that is aimed towards Gen Z, one of the core and most important things to understand is that you have to make us feel something, right? The reason why I go on Facebook, or in fact, the reason why many of us go on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter is because we're watching funny videos or cat videos. Anyone watch cat videos on Instagram or Facebook all day long? Yeah, because it makes us laugh, right? That's the emotion. It makes us feel something. It makes us laugh. It makes us cry. And that's one of the most important fundamentals to understand when it comes to engaging with Generation Z, that the content that you're producing has got to make us feel something. You need to speak our language, right? The example I just shared right now was about memes. Memes are essentially the language. That's how we're communicating messages. That's how, as you've seen in the previous slide, people are actually speaking in memes. So when you're looking at building strategies for Generation Z, how can you begin to create pieces of content that speak to us? And I think more importantly, strategies that speak our language. And the last one, you have to make sure that the content you're producing for us earns our time and attention. I've heard this time and time again, which is people saying Gen Z have an attention span of 8 seconds. Anyone heard that? Yeah? Many of us. The truth is, anyone know what The Stranger is? Netflix series, The Stranger? I just spent 9 hours this weekend cuddled up with my girlfriend watching The Stranger. and the point I'm trying to illustrate here is any piece of content you produce, if it's good enough, it needs to make sure that it earns our time and attention. That could be a binge-worthy Netflix series, which is several episodes long. That earns our time and attention, and it provides us with a form of value. That's the reason why we spend so much time with it. So when you're producing content, produce something that warrants our attention and our time. So did a bit of research, and we spoke to our community, and we really did some research to understand what the 3 top platforms where Gen Z are mostly on. The first one was YouTube. As many of you guys know, there's tons and tons of influencers now where we type on YouTube, if I want to watch something interesting. Anybody know somebody called David Dobrik on YouTube? A couple of people? Yeah? So essentially, we'll search for these big YouTubers and influencers, Patricia Bright, Nella Rose, I can name so many, but we'll search for these influencers, and we spend 15, 20, 30 minutes watching these long videos around how these influencers are engaging. And a lot of our time is spent on platforms like YouTube. Instagram. Now, Instagram is an interesting one. A lot of people usually, produce content on Instagram and will post to the story. But what we're finding more and more is that Gen Z are spending their time on Instagram story. Anybody use Instagram story? I'm guilty of using Instagram stories. In fact, on my way here, I was just tapping through my friends' stories to see what they were up to. and that's how we consume content these days, which is we're spending a lot of our time on Instagram, but in particular on Instagram story. Interestingly enough, 60 to 70% of all content now on Instagram is circumnavigated to Instagram story, which is absolutely interesting, a fact to know. And then TikTok. So TikToks, for those that don't know, are these 15-second, minimum 15 seconds, so about a minute, videos where young people, Gen Z, will create these really cool videos where they're either, taking part in a challenge or they're reenacting a particular song that they really enjoy and engage with. And TikTok has been built to engage and attract Generation Z. So if you're thinking about taking your engagement, your recruitment, or your engagement for Generation Z to that next level, how can you leverage these 3 platforms in your strategy? And what we've also done is we've categorized which content formats deliver the highest engagement. All right? So what we did is, starting with video and moving all the way down to Facebook Live. Video, as we most know this, is, I think 85% of all online content in 2020 will now be video content. And it's the most highly engaged pieces of content for Gen Z in particular. Video content is on Instagram, it's on YouTube, it's on TikTok. And that's the piece of content that garners the most attention when it comes to engaging with us. Then images, and we've seen a very illustrious example with memes earlier. So images have become a medium in which Gen Z are communicating their messages to each other. Surprisingly, bang on right in the middle, podcasts. We found that podcasts were actually an interesting medium where Gen Z are actually beginning to spend most of their time. You see, and the reason that's the case is because the influencers who we love and follow and watch on Instagram, on YouTube, what they're doing is that they've begun to migrate that audience directly to podcasts. Podcasts are one of the most unique platforms because they offer a creator or an organization the opportunity to build a stronger relationship with the user. What you're doing with the podcast is, I can watch a YouTube video with my friends, right? I can watch that with a group of people, but with a podcast, I listen to it on my own. Right? So what you're building there with a podcast is that stronger relationship, a much stronger connection between your user base. And what we're finding more and more is that we're opting to listen to podcasts. On my way here, I was listening to a podcast. And a lot of people within our demographic are listening to podcasts. And then we have articles. So I know a lot of us will create articles on our websites, all designed to attract the audience of students that we're looking to pull in. But anybody heard of carousels? Does anybody know what carousels are? A few people. So carousels are a medium of communication or media that essentially allow you to take the key concepts from an article. So if you write an article on your website, how can you turn that into almost a slide? It's like 9 or 10 slides, which are very graphic and really amplify the message being given in the article. So how can you break down, a 1,000-word article into a carousel and bring up the key points and then into a well-designed piece of content? We found that carousels garner the highest level of engagement. I don't know if you guys have seen on LinkedIn, but more and more creators are beginning to share carousels. And the reason they're doing this, I'm going to share this with you guys now, is because of how the algorithms actually work on Instagram, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. When you're moving and scrolling through those slides, the algorithm sees that as engagement. Right? The more you move through that carousel, the more the algorithm says, oh, this is an engaging piece of content. Let's continue to push this out to more people. And just a quick little breakdown on how some of these platforms work, or a lot of them work like this. On Instagram, when you produce a piece of content, it will only go out to about 5% of your audience. Instagram will serve this piece of content to 5% of your audience. If they like it and they're engaging with it, it then opens it up to the rest of your audience and more. So if that first piece of content garners their time and attention and warrants engagement, then your content will actually be pushed to a much larger audience. And the last one is Instagram Live. And it might be surprising for a few people that Instagram Live is the last platform. The only issue with Instagram Live that we found is it's inconveniencing. We found time and time again that creators on these platforms that have millions of followers will only get thousands of people viewing their Instagram stories because half the time we're in lectures or we're in college or we're doing things. So because of their inconvenience, they're falling as the 5th most engaged content format. So we're going to dive a little bit deep into Instagram and just share a little bit of insight and knowledge into what we know. 53% higher engagement than a platform like Facebook. So if your strategy is centered around Instagram, you'll be delivering 53% higher engagement than a platform like Facebook and 2,000% more engagement than Twitter. And partly because of that is well linked to the first point around your stories. Because people are engaging more and more with stories, we're finding that engagement rates on Instagram in particular are a lot higher. So 75% of the whole entire audience, based between 18 and 24, are are engaging content around Instagram. So how can you build a strategy which is content heavy, based on content which lives and breathes on Instagram? And what I'm going to do in the next few slides is just show you some examples of the kind of content you can be, pushing out on your Instagram stories. So here are 3 examples. I think these have already begun. But the next one is just going to be a quick little video which we mocked up and created of the kind of engaging content that you can actually be producing. So that was just an example of a piece of content that we mocked up for this presentation, and we're going to be using the exact same format for our content that we're going to be releasing very soon. So that's just a quick example of how you can engage with Gen Z on a platform like Instagram and really deliver results on a platform where 75% of the audience are spending a lot of their time on. Some examples of pieces of content you can actually begin and get started with today or tomorrow, whenever you get back into the office. Mythbuster Mondays, a piece of content all centered around busting myths in the industry. So if you're a bank, how can you begin to produce content which just shares more insight into some of the myths surrounding banking? Trainee Tuesday, if you're a law firm, right, how can you bring your trainees into the conversation, right? Engage with them on Instagram story, bring them and give them the opportunity to ask and answer some of the questions that the audience actually has. FAQ Fridays, very interesting format as well, where you add a sticker on Instagram and the audience is given the opportunity to ask any questions about your company, what you do, how to apply, what the application process is like, interviews, assessment centers. And what this can literally be is half an hour, somebody in your team spending time to just go through these questions and engage with them. And the most important thing about this kind of content is that it's episodic. It happens every week, right? You're giving young people the opportunity to come back to this piece of content. So every Monday, they expect a piece of content on their Instagram story where you're engaging with them at that level. And that's how you continue to build this content, which is value-led and provides so much value, so much intrinsic value for the audience. So we mocked up a few examples of thumbnails on pieces of content which can actually go on YouTube and pieces of content that can actually go on Instagram. And the key thing to remember here is create content that's actually worth clicking on, right? Going back to the first point I made around content that garners our time and attention, if you can produce content that looks like this. So if we take the first example, for example, tech consultants with a 2.2 degree, question mark. What this is saying to the audience or the community is, you're a tech consultant. You accept 2.2 degrees. And it's done in a very cool way where you've got a shocked face, which is what most people are thinking. And the second example, how did a history grad get into banking? Right? The misconception now is amongst us, Gen Z, is that if you want to work in a bank, you've got to do finance. You've got to do a businessy degree. But the truth is, all banks accept all degree disciplines. So you can be doing history, you can be doing art or music and still get into a bank. But how do you create eye-catching content that's actually worth clicking on, but garners so much attention and engagement from the audience? So here are some examples that you can create, and you can personalize this to fit your organization or your firm. And so we've walked through content, we've walked through the importance of producing these types of content, but why should we produce content like this? We as Gen Z engage with value-driven content. Gone are the days of ads that say, come work for us, we'll give you this, we'll give you this, we'll give you this. We see that all the time. We're engaged in so many ads across social media, which we just block. 85% of Gen Z have ad blockers, which is if you're using any form of advertising, we'll block it and we won't engage with it because we see it so often. How can you begin to produce pieces of content which are value-driven? How can you provide us with information on how to get into the industry, on particular tips on applications, on CVs, on interviews, and actually cultivate a community of talent who you can activate later on? It needs to be shareable. The content that you're producing has got to garner shareability. That's how you go from one person being interested in your organization to 10, 15, 20 other people who have that same brand affinity as the first person that shared that piece of content. And shareability has such a weighting, because if you can get a piece of content to be shared and then engaged with, you're opening up your community to a much larger subset of Gen Z. And I think more importantly is that last point. The last point around positioning. The value-driven content that is shareable is all nothing if you don't strategically position yourself as a Gen Z partner. What I mean by that is that you're cultivating a community, providing them with intrinsic value months before you even need them. Months before you have any roles open. How can you begin to produce highly valuable pieces of content, which are all centered around providing them with such value, and position yourself as a Gen Z partner? How can your organization be partners with us? Instead of an organization that comes to us when they need us, how can you actively be our partners and partner with us when we're building or thinking about working in industry? So I'm gonna walk through a case study of a national law firm. Anybody know Shoesmith? Fantastic, fantastic, quite a few people. Amazing. So I'm gonna walk through a case study with Shoesmith, who are a national commercial law firm. And what they did was quite interesting. Leading up to the graduate recruitment season in 2020, they began producing 2 pieces of video content every single month. And this content was value-led. It was all centered around providing advice and support to trainees. They were answering questions. They were providing them with intrinsic value. And they shared these pieces of content on all the social channels, on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, across the whole subset of social. And these are the results that they got. Their assessment center dropout rates went from 23% to a measly 0.5%. And what I mean by assessment center dropout rates is those apprentices or the graduates that calling and say, oh, I'm going to drop out. I can't make the assessment center. Or they calling and say they're sick just before the assessment center. So those numbers completely dropped from 23% to 0.5%. And the total engagement across social was 65,000 with no ad spend. And for those of you that know, platforms like Facebook and Instagram have declining engagement, which is when you produce a piece of content on Facebook, it doesn't actually reach as many people because Facebook now want you to pay to reach your own audience, which I find absurd. So, Mills, how is this all linked to social media? What's the business case for producing content? Why should we produce these videos and social media and all that? What's the actual business case? So what Shoosmith did was they asked their trainees, the newly hired trainees, why did you guys actually end up taking the offer in the end? Why did you guys decide to come and work for us? Because they wanted to understand why these numbers had dropped so significantly. And they were saying things like, they felt really invested, right? These trainees felt invested in the firm. They felt like they knew the people. They knew the trainees. They knew the culture and the personality of the firm. And that leads back to the first point I made about taking us on a journey and produce valuable content so that we can see you as our partner, right? And they managed to do this. They managed to do that. And they asked them all these questions, and they all came back and said, we couldn't let you down, because you were so invested in us that we had to continue investing in all the things that the firm actually does. Content distribution. So we've spoken about content, we've spoken about the importance of content, and we've spoken about how to create content that's actually engaging. But how do you begin to distribute that content? Where can we start? Right? We've created content, we understand that it has to be value-driven, but how do we begin to actually distribute this out to the audience that needs it the most? The best place to start is LinkedIn. It's the free and easiest point to start is LinkedIn. If you, for example, produce a piece of content where you have a protagonist from your firm, get them to be your micro-influencer. Get them to share that piece of content on their own LinkedIn profile. One thing we know about LinkedIn is LinkedIn love people sharing success, sharing stories, sharing advice. If you can share that piece of content for free on LinkedIn and it's value-driven, engagement goes up, shareability goes up, and if you can also bring in your employees to supplement that engagement, that then just increases and gets that content moving virally across the internet. See? And then there are other things like influencers and leveraging influencers, and jumping onto things like hashtags and trending hashtags on Twitter and on Instagram. But these are some of the ways that you can begin to actually distribute this content that you have created. And again, take us on a journey. Don't just produce content for us when you need a result from us. Begin to take us on a journey. Begin to provide us with value months before you actually need to activate us. Offline engagements. This is a really interesting one because what we've found from running several campaigns for some of our partner organizations is something very interesting. When it comes to Generation Z, you produce social content which garners conversions, and you can build that general awareness for your organization. But an important piece to all of this is offline events. How can you bring that audience that you've activated online to your company? How can you bring apprentices to your organization? How can you go on campus and begin to speak to these young people about what you do? How can you begin to curate events where you're building and filling up a room like this with talent who you can really speak to about what your organization does? And that's become a really key component in all of this. Once you've activated them socially, how do you then bring them down the funnel and take them on a journey from online to offline? And what I'm going to do now is just run through a case study which we've just completed in the last quarter for one of our clients. And essentially what we did was we created 6 unique pieces of value-driven content, which were all centered around telling their story, providing value, providing interest, and we built this content set across 5-6 months where we're just cultivating the audience, providing the audience with such value, and really giving them all the tips and tricks that they need to actually get into this company. So we're taking them on a journey again. And then what we did was that we activated that online attention to run in 19 well-curated campus events, where we went from universities in Scotland, in in London, in the Southeast, Southwest, in the Midlands, in Northwest. And we brought and activated that online attention into running offline events where they were given an opportunity to speak directly to the talent, to speak directly to Generation Z and share what they felt and share why they feel like they should work for this organization. And these are some of the results that we got. So across the campaign, we had 638 event attendees, and we managed to 6x their previous attendance figures. On average, 34 students would attend each event, which was incredible because the previous year they would have 2 or 3 people turning up. But we managed to get, across the campaign, 34 graduates and apprentices at different events actually turning up to see what the Royal Air Force did. Another thing was the BAME attendance increased by 52%. So we had more BAME students actually turning up to these events and providing a value and actually being able to listen to what the RAF have to say. And more importantly, they filled 100% of all their roles months before the application window had closed. And they had never done this before. So we've walked through content, we've walked through why content is so important, how to create the content, how to keep them engaged. So what do we do once we've given them the offer? What next? How do we ensure that they actually come through and actually begin to work with us? And let's walk through what tends to happen when people are given an offer. So when Gen Z are given an offer, when I get an offer for a company, what tends to happen is one of these 3 things. There is a cold spot, there's a cold period between being given the offer and actually beginning the internship or graduate position as an apprentice or as a grad. So in that period, what kind of things can you really be doing to engage us in your company? Because a lot of time and effort and resources goes into the whole entire process, from attraction all the way through to engagement. And then now you've given them the offer, how do you ensure that they actually convert and actually start to work at your organization? It's your opportunity. There's an opportunity here in those cold spots to do one of several things. The first being, how can you collectively put us into a group, into a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group? And what you're doing in this LinkedIn group is that you're cultivating the talent. You're providing them with tips on things that they can be doing on their first day. You're slowly beginning to introduce them to some of their team members. You're sharing examples of pieces of work that they'll be doing, and you're providing them with value even before they can begin. And the main reason why you have these Facebook groups and social groups is because of social interactions, right? If you get these people in a group and they feel like they're part of a collective, they make friends. And when you make friends, you don't want to let your friends down, do you? Hands up if you want to let your friends down. No one. See? So once you get them in that group, they build these strong friendship groups of people who they understand, they know, and they love, and they all collectively become so excited about working for the company. And if you can supplement that with providing them with more support, advice, Facebook Lives, provide them with resources in that period between getting the offer and actually starting, it's an incredible piece of, it's an incredible opportunity that you can utilize to really build your engagement strategies. And I'm going to end with something which I see to be an important piece that needs to be spoken about, especially in a room of employers. And I know a lot of us are out there trying to attract and engage Gen Z to our early careers teams and bring us into our organizations. But what I wanted to say was Gen Z mental health, and just give you an understanding of what we usually go through before actually applying to these organizations. If you're in first year, you're in second year, you're in third year, you've got exams. A lot of your time and your mental capacity is spent revising for exams, preparing for exams, and you're applying to lots and lots and lots and lots of different companies, that by the time that you actually secure an offer, your mental health is exasperated. It's no shock that 36% of all grads end up leaving their graduate position. And And I'm here to kind of push this message out to the room of employers and just say, could you be doing more to support them with things like mental health when they come into the organization? Could you be running events or giving them that support when they do come into the organization to really support them actively with things like their mental health? And as I finish, some key takeaways. Always remember that the content you produce should not be us, come work for us, come work for us. It should be value-driven. It should be all centered around cultivating a community. Take us on the journey. Take us on the journey, lead us, and make sure and ensure that you have constant engagement throughout. And here's something. So we have spent the last couple of weeks developing this, which is a recruiter's guide to attracting Gen Z on social. So this is an ebook that we're releasing here and now for the first time. So this hasn't been seen anywhere before. This is the first opportunity that we're actually releasing this out. So this is a guide which runs through everything I've mentioned and more around all the strategies that you should be implementing, types and examples of content, formats. It goes into depth with platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Byte even, TikTok, and provides you with practical tools and tips that you can begin implementing today. So if you want to have access to the ebook, take a picture of that. The link is bit.ly/tapingenz. That's a capital I, and that's a capital Z. Or drop us an email at hello@wearetapin, and we'll send you the ebook for free. And that's the end of me. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity.